one of Asia's foremost minds in regional policy, trade, and diplomacy. Dr. Pushpanathan Sundram was the Deputy Secretary-General of ASEAN from 2009 to 2011, overseeing the ASEAN Economic Community. After decades at the heart of ASEAN, he went on to advise multinationals and now leads Public Policy Asia Advisors, guiding Fortune 500 companies and regional governments on policy, market access, and strategy. He has been awarded many medals, awards from different institutions and governments and universities, and a decorated powerbroker, published author, and visiting fellow at the Chiang Mai University. Dr. Sundram holds a PhD in public policy. So it is my very distinct honor to welcome you today to share your wisdom and knowledge from decades of experience working at the heart of ASEAN at this very topical and interesting region. So perhaps before we begin, I want to first make a small distinction between ASEAN and Southeast Asia. For those who are not aware, when we speak of ASEAN, we're talking about the organization born in 1967 after the Bangkok Declaration, and currently which has 10 members. Whereas when we speak of Southeast Asia, we're talking about the geographic region, including more countries, but encompassing more than just the association itself. So for perhaps my first question to you, as we are making this distinction, is what is ASEAN and how does it work, how we came to where we are today, and generally as an intergovernmental organization, how does it function from your perspective?
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to this podcast. Now, ASEAN is an intergovernmental organization, as you said, and it composes of the 10 countries in Southeast Asia. And we are hoping Timor-Leste will join in October, so depending on the decision of the ASEAN Summit. Now, the interesting part of ASEAN is when we were established in 1967, it was a period of tension, actually. I mean, the countries were just independent, and they had to look at their own national development as well as look at how they can work with each other in Southeast Asia. Now, the interesting part is when the 5 countries, the key countries came together, like Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Singapore, and Malaysia, their aim was to look at areas where they can cooperate in, because they don't want to go into areas like, defense and security and political, where there were tensions, actually. And because previously they had 3 other organizations, they tried to set up 3 other organizations and failed in all 3 setups. There was this SEATO, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, which was seen as somewhat construction of the U.S. Then there was the Mafilindo, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia kind of setup. Didn't work because of the confrontation situation. And then there was this ASEA, ASEA. That too didn't work because of conflicts between some 2 countries. So in a sense, when ASEAN came about in 1967, there was this feeling that whether this organization will still survive, right? And so ASEAN countries, the ASEAN 5 countries, were careful to focus on socio-cultural, some economic kind of cooperation, instead of looking at across all the areas of cooperation. So that's how ASEAN came about. And it allowed the 5 countries to slowly actually come together, discuss some of the key issues of the region. And ASEAN went on an expansion where we saw countries like Brunei, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Myanmar joining eventually. So by the year of by the turn of the century, ASEAN was basically 10 countries of Southeast Asia. That's how it started. And they started developing other aspects like, from the economic to the political security and the socio-cultural over the years. And then, of course, in 2008, ASEAN had the ASEAN Charter, which actually is a legal binding instrument, which basically puts in place the core principles of ASEAN, the way the various institutions in ASEAN will work, and so on. So that particular document is, I would say, a milestone. Then supporting that, we had the blueprints. I was lucky to work on the ASEAN Economic Community blueprint. It took me 2 years actually to get it through. It was adopted in same time as the ASEAN Charter. So we had, for the first time, we had the ASEAN Economic Community blueprint. Then we have the Political Security Community blueprint, and then the Socio-Cultural Community blueprint. And the blueprint was 7 years. And then ASEAN went on to adopt other blueprints eventually, actually. And then, so the first plan was 7 years, second plan was 10 years, and now the third plan is about 20 years. So what it shows that ASEAN needs more time, actually, because a lot of measures, and since it's an intergovernmental organization, it will need time. And some of the measures are not implemented in the first blueprint or the second blueprint. So now they call it strategic plans. But interestingly, for the economic community, they have a shorter plan of 5 years because the situation is so fluid. So the economic ministers, I guess, would have thought about having a 5-year plan so that they can kind of manage and coordinate the developments across the world and how ASEAN will respond to them. So that's how the whole ASEAN process was kind of set up and functioning. I mean, now I can say that ASEAN is here to stay. There's no other organization that can do the work of ASEAN. But of course, there are a lot of challenges it faces. And how it manages internally all its challenges is going to be the main thing that will determine whether this organization will thrive in the rather uncertain world today.
I think just to drill a little deeper on the historical perspective you shared, how Southeast Asia were able to maintain peace and harmony over the past few decades. It's not an incident. It's not a determined outcome of history. Conflict is the constant, has been the constant since the beginning, since the World War II, since the Cold War. But we were, I think, lucky to have visionary leaders and the right historical conditions to foster internal peace first, and then more external dialogues with the greater world. So, I mean, looking back to the journey ASEAN has come, as you said, it takes time. It takes time for things to work. What kind of lessons you think it learned over the years from its mistakes, and how has it adapted better instruments or tools to manage internal conflicts, or whether when it comes to engaging with external powers?
Yeah, so I think I'll go back to the point that ASEAN is an intergovernmental organization. Unlike the EU, it's about 10 countries driving the organization. So that's one aspect of it. Now, over the years, I would say ASEAN has learned from the way it deals with one another, actually. So there are more than 1,000 over meetings. So sometimes there's always this question, why ASEAN needs to have more than 1,000 meetings a year, actually. But I think the meetings are not really bad, actually, because the meetings bring about a better understanding of each other's views. You know, the camaraderie is kind of built around this. So there's a formal meeting part of it that everyone knows. But there is also an informal way that ASEAN works. I mean, like golf course, or they group together and eat durians, you know. And previously, in the older time, they have karaoke sessions. All this helps in a way, in the sense that it brings them together. So some of the key issues that ASEAN had were not solved at the table, actually. It was solved at golf courses, some of the key ones, actually. So when they're sitting together, huddling together, away from the officials, the ASEAN leaders made some of the key decisions. So the informality of ASEAN, I think, is a very strong point. I want to emphasize here, of the 10 leaders knowing each other well and making those kind of decision, which will not be possible at a meeting where there will be tables, documents for the leaders and ministers to follow. So this helps to break that ice, I would say, in terms of their work. But eventually, when the ASEAN Charter came into place, then there were more things actually. The organs were more well established. Like at the leaders level is the highest decision-making body, and then we have the coordinating councils. Then each individual ASEAN community have its own council, and under the council there are many ministerial meetings. So it's a more structured organization. But I would say that it can be further improved. I think ASEAN is looking at improving its mechanisms, also really looking at the ASEAN Charter and so on. So I think it's time for ASEAN to really look at what are the gaps. I mean, the Charter was implemented since 2008, so it's more than 10 years. Perhaps it's a good time to really review the Charter and look at where we can improve in terms of making sure that ASEAN can work more efficiently and more effectively as we face an uncertain world. So I would say that over the years they have learned. But one thing I must mention here is that ASEAN norms and principles will have to stay, because this is the gel actually that brought them together. So if you start dismantling that, then there's going to be a problem. So it has been tried and tested for the last 50 years. So the norms of consensus, the norms of consultation, non-interference will have to stay, because this is an intergovernmental organization, not a bloc. So this will really help ASEAN to stay on its course, trust one another. Because Southeast Asia, there was so much of mistrust in the 1960s, but this has now eventually more transformed into more cooperation, I would say.
When you mentioned earlier that ASEAN is not like the EU, what did you mean exactly? How is ASEAN different?
So EU is a union actually. So and the European Union, which is a very strong organization, and they have a European Commission which has more than 15,000 staff. ASEAN has about probably less than 1,000 staff actually. So it's totally a different game actually. So the EU, as a union, the European Commission can basically negotiate a trade agreement on behalf of the European member states, right? The EU member states. In the case of ASEAN, the ASEAN Secretariat, I would say, is a more an administrative body and a facilitating body in terms of cooperation, but it is not equipped to represent ASEAN in terms of negotiating any agreements. So when it goes to negotiation, it's normally the 10 countries negotiating with another party. It's not the ASEAN Secretariat. ASEAN Secretariat role is more administrative. So interestingly, when I was in the ASEAN Secretariat, there was actually a discussion whether the ASEAN Secretariat should evolve, and if it evolves, what will it be? Will it be a administrative secretariat as it is now, or it will be a more coordinating secretariat, or it will be an executive secretariat like the European Commission? So the member states, because they hold their sovereignty so tight, they still wanted the secretariat to be an administrative secretariat. That means facilitating cooperation, doing the administrative work for ASEAN. So that's why when someone asks, is the Secretary-General really a secretary or is he a general? So I would say it's a gray area in between. Yeah. So his influence is, I think even the secretary influence is based on their, institutional knowledge, and basically most of the secretariat staffs are competent technocrats, so what they bring out to the table actually. So that's very helpful for member states in terms of making decisions.
That leads to my next question is on what actual concrete authority does ASEAN have then, if you're saying it is more an administrative body than executive. So it doesn't have the power superseding the governments in the association. And it lacks enforcement power given just a number of staff. And plus what you mentioned about the ASEAN way, the norms and principles of non-interventionist approach, consensus building, the informal negotiations, the Durian sessions. So then again, what concrete authority does it have at the end of the day?
So basically, I think we have to think outside the box here, because the ASEAN secretarial role, as I mentioned, is more facilitating and coordinating. But the decisions are made by the ASEAN member states, like the summit, the highest decision-making body, and then the ministerial councils and so on. So this is I would say a setup where the secretariat works together with the member states and not separately. So I would say they are together, actually, the secretariat working with the member states. And the member states make the decision, because it's an intergovernmental organization like the United Nations too. So where the countries come together, they have various committees where all the 10 countries are represented with the secretariat, and they make the decision, right? So when it comes to enforcement, I think that is one area that ASEAN will have to look at, because when it comes to compliance, I think they have actually been able to set up compliance mechanisms to check whether member states are implementing specific measures in the blueprints and all that, or strategic plans. But going beyond to look at enforcement, ASEAN is not set up actually to do enforcement, right? So it all needs to come from the member states themselves, that they have implemented how much of the measure. So that is one of the issues ASEAN is facing, but they're managing it, I would say, because I don't think there will be a time where the secretariat will be given the task of enforcing. Because if you look at enforcing, then you need a secretariat of 15,000 people. I don't think ASEAN will be able to kind of fund that kind of secretariat, and it also affects their national sovereignty. How much you would like a third party to come in and inspect what you are doing at the country level. I don't think ASEAN has gone to that stage yet, but I'm not saying that in future the new generation will take ASEAN to that stage. But as of now, I don't see that happening actually on the enforcement part. But at least the compliance is there. Then I think it's the duty of each of the ASEAN countries to make sure that they implement the measures so that everyone will benefit from the integration.
I think one of the most common critiques of ASEAN is along the similar line is it's kind of laid-back approach when it comes to compliance issues, when it comes to enforcement. It prioritizes harmony over tough questions, if I may put it that way. Indonesia's ex-foreign minister, was quoted also in your book, Dr. Marty Natalegawa wrote a book called Does ASEAN Matter? And I think he said that the obituary of ASEAN has been written many times. And ASEAN has lost its finesse in balancing the greater powers of the world. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think ASEAN's influence is in decline, given the global context of kind of the declining influence of these multilateralism of international intergovernmental organizations and increasing hostility, great power struggles and conflicts?
I would say it is not just because of ASEAN, but I think of what's happening outside ASEAN, I would say, because you look at the situation now, the world is moving in a very uncertain path, actually. I mean, with the U.S. tariffs, the EU itself, and then looking at developments in, if you South-South cooperation, for example, the BRICS part of it, right? I mean, so that BRICS part is now expanding with countries like, even ASEAN countries like Indonesia being a member, Malaysia has applied for membership, Thailand is looking at it, Vietnam is a partner. So what does it mean to ASEAN centrality? So that is actually a question actually, because as of now, ASEAN see countries like Indonesia joining BRICS as part of the South of South cooperation can help to put ASEAN positions in these BRICS meetings and so on. I think it's a valid reasoning, but eventually you need to really look at the centrality of ASEAN. Now the Indo-Pacific strategy is there. So how does ASEAN handle that aspect of it, of the Indo-Pacific strategy? And of course, ASEAN is also looking at engaging others. So I would say, to me, sometimes I say back to basics. So what ASEAN will need to do is strengthen its core actually. So during the COVID, interestingly, if you look at ASEAN trade, right? Actually, the intra-ASEAN trade became the buffer for ASEAN actually, because 22% of the trade is done within ASEAN itself. That actually helped ASEAN actually during the COVID situation when the supply chains were fragmented and so on. So perhaps, which I think Prime Minister Lawrence Wong also mentioned that actually, that ASEAN will need to look at having a free trade area actually. I mean, ASEAN has a free trade area, but removing all the remaining tariffs and the non-tariff barriers actually. That could be something that ASEAN should look at, in the sense that how do you bring the intra-ASEAN trade, which has always been hovering between, say, 20 to 24%. How do you really, increase the figure then? I mean, can ASEAN move to, say, 30% of trade? So perhaps if they can remove the trade barriers and all that, they may inch closer to that figure. But I would say still the external partners are going to be important, like China. China, I think there are two aspects to it. One is the political aspect, where we have the issue of the South China Sea. And then there is the economic aspect. China is one of the largest trading partner of ASEAN and increasingly becoming a big investor. So how do we manage that situation? How do we manage Trump's tariff and the way ASEAN is dealing with it bilaterally? So how do we manage that? How ASEAN as an organization manage that? That will be another area that ASEAN will need to really look at. And then going beyond, ASEAN is looking at the Gulf Cooperation Council and other groupings in terms of greater engagement and possibly free trade agreements. So how does ASEAN manage that plus existing free trade agreements? ASEAN already has a number of free trade agreements. So what I think is, going back to the basic, you deepen those free trade agreements, you deepen your intra-ASEAN collaboration, trade integration. You look at other areas within ASEAN actually, how you can strengthen first. Because by being strong internally, then ASEAN can project itself better.
Yeah.
That's what I think actually. But I find that now with all this uncertainty, ASEAN is going for the outreach. I mean, it's going out to extend itself, that we want to partner with this grouping or that country. But I think first look at what you can do internally to strengthen the organization and the integration. Then I think the outreach will come naturally, I guess. So that's why I always kind of feel that it needs to go back to the basics.
I mean, there are hard differences that we cannot overlook on the front of culture, language, religion, ethnicity. Let's put it, democratic institutions versus more traditional authoritative countries. But beyond that, we also have man-made barriers, like you said, the trade barriers, non-tariff barriers, restrictions on labor, on intellectual property. So do you think one day the ASEAN can eventually become a more integrated economic bloc like the EU, given all the barriers at present, given that it's so important and critical to look internally and go back to the basics, as you said?
Yeah, I think so. Like now they have actually worked on the DEFA, which is the Digital Economic Framework. I think ASEAN will have to look at really at the digital aspect of it. How do you bring the regions together? I think this is an opportunity. The DEFA, I hope, will be in place soon, and ASEAN will work on other initiatives from that aspect of it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for ASEAN to come together, but they need to remove those barriers, right? It's no longer tariff, actually. It's the non-tariff barriers. What I mean non-tariff barriers, it's a broad word, actually, like harmonization of standards. Different countries have different standards, actually. How do you harmonize them? Convergence of their regulations, So the countries have, I kind of represent so many clients. So a product from one client can go into, say, one country in ASEAN, say, for example, Indonesia, but it cannot go into another country, say, Malaysia, because the standards are different, right? So in a sense, so if I'm a producer of this particular product, I need to have a label for Indonesia, and then I need to print a separate label for Malaysia. That's very costly for a business actually. So it loses the competitiveness. So ASEAN will have to look at the standardization of standardization of standards, regulations too. 10 countries, 10 different regulations. How do you bring the regulations, harmonize those regulations? And how do you facilitate trade as a whole, right? So the biggest barrier, I think, is in the agriculture side, right? Because each country would like to protect its own agricultural sector, which is the biggest employment sector, actually, right? In countries like, say, Cambodia, Laos, and so on. So how can countries open up that sector, actually? Slowly, I guess, gradually. So it's not going to be an overnight process. I would say it's a marathon. It cannot be a sprint. It's going to be a marathon. Slowly, I think ASEAN will have to start looking at all the barriers and then trying to close the gaps. That's why I think this idea of extending the next strategic plan to 2045, 20 years, is a good strategy, actually. But I think every 5 years they need to have milestone. Otherwise, after 20 years, 20 for 30, 45, and look at it, nothing much done.
Just keep pushing back the goalpost.
Yeah, that's right. They keep pushing back. That is what's happening from the first blueprint to the second blueprint, all that, So how do you make sure that ASEAN don't kick the ball further down and start implementing it? So that's why the compliance part is important. The compliance can be done by the ASEAN Secretariat. They have actually an economic integration monitoring directorate. So they can actually do the work, give them more empowerment, actually, to go down to the country. Can be a voluntary basis first, but eventually have a more structured way in terms where this organization directorate can do the compliance check to see whether actually we have implemented on the ground and make recommendations, right? On the enforcement part, I think still a long way. I don't think ASEAN is ready for a supranational organization to do enforcement. So it is going to be, I guess, the idea of collaborating with the Secretariat and trying to implement whatever gaps they have. Yeah.
So just on the example you raised about standard harmonization and about the different labeling issues, what's driving that? Why such a seemingly simple problem? Why is it not addressed after so long? Is it because of a lack of political will, or is it because they're intended to protect domestic industries? So why hasn't things like that been fixed, the non-tariff barriers?
Yeah, as you said, one will be the protection of the infant industries, right? So in a sense, actually, of course, there is also reason for some countries, actually, because of certain standards, like, for example, when it comes to vitamin D, Thailand has a different view about the amount of vitamin D in a product, the percentage of vitamin D in a product compared to the other countries. So because of the needs of the people, actually, So in a sense, so the producer will have to change actually. So you cannot use too much of vitamin D in Thailand, which can be used in other countries for the same product, right? So it could be a trade barrier too, in the sense that they want to protect their own industry, local industry. So, and also to create employment actually. Like for example, testing, right? Same product that go into 10 different countries of ASEAN will require testing in each of the country. The testing is all done in the US or Europe. The US and Europe are the reference countries. But when it goes to, say, a country in ASEAN, they have to go through the same field trials and the testing for the product. So that creates, of course, jobs for their local labs and all that. But it delays a product of innovative product to come into the market. So there are some studies which show that certain products come into the market in Europe in 1-2 years, but in Southeast Asia it takes 7 years. So the 6 years of loss actually in terms of using this innovative product in the agriculture sector. So I think this is something that ASEAN will have to factor into that. Actually, that means that product is not providing that kind of advanced technology for your farmers, for example, right? How do you use those kind of, how do you get a market for that kind of products so that the farmers can benefit much earlier, and that can improve their basically productivity and also the profits the farmers make actually. I mean, just giving an example. So, yeah.
It sounds like very frustrating from an insider's perspective, looking at all the barriers that exist that, being talked about at the table for so many times, but still no solution.
Yeah.
So I guess on that point, I want to ask about, maybe come back to the mechanism of ASEAN and how decisions are made. What are the formal and informal channels of communication between the leaders, the prime ministers, the foreign ministers? Are there, let's say, like group chats or email groups that if, let's say, Lawrence Wong wants to call Anwar one day, he can just pick up the phone?
I would say, basically, since these are governments, right, I don't think they will go into WhatsApp chats and all that, but they have hotlines actually. So if there's an issue, so all the ASEAN countries have set up hotline. So the prime minister of one country can just pick up the phone and talk to someone actually. So we have those kind of hotlines across ASEAN countries, right? And then each of the ASEAN country, there is a permanent representative. So say Singapore has a permanent representative of ASEAN in Indonesia, right? So if it comes to ASEAN matter, this permanent representative will be the one that the governments of the countries use to bring up issues, right? So the permanent representatives can discuss about it and find a way to talk. But I think leaders sometimes they call each other actually when the officials cannot make that kind of decision. So those hotlines are there. It helps. And the various ASEAN processes, like I mentioned, the permanent representatives are there to help on ASEAN issues. So this permanent representative is separate from the ambassador. So Singapore can have an ambassador in Indonesia, but they have another at the ambassador level, a permanent representative who only focus on ASEAN issues. And that person has an office in Jakarta and attends most of the meetings of the ASEAN Secretariat. So that helps actually. That helps, right?
So what is this hotline? Is it
a phone line?
You can directly call the other prime minister's office?
Yes. Yeah. So you can call. I think they will have to make an appointment, I guess, and then they can call directly. And it's helpful when issues like, a Myanmar issue came up recently. And so that really helps actually. So, and during the COVID time also, I think they that hotlines actually help in communication and all that. So ASEAN is doing its best, I would say, trying to, within its limitations, trying its best to focus on cooperation. But there are a lot of distractions across the region. As I mentioned, BRICS, Indo-Pacific, the US, and tariffs and so on. How ASEAN responds to this will be the issue actually.
I think we touched upon this a little bit earlier, but what is ASEAN's position on member states like Indonesia and Malaysia flirting with BRICS, and you see the divergence of perhaps the Philippines on one side with a closer U.S. tie, and Malaysia on the other, Thailand closer to China. What is ASEAN's position? And in an ideal world, everybody would come together, but in today's reality, it's not possible.
So I can tell you, the official position of ASEAN is BRICS membership is part of South-South cooperation. It will help ASEAN. It will help ASEAN to project its messages and position in BRICS, for example. That's the official position. But if you ask me, frankly, I think as long as BRICS is not structured, so BRICS is a meeting of at the very high level of the leaders and all that. I don't think there's a challenge to ASEAN. But if the BRICS become structured, they have their own secretariat, they have their own organizational setup and all that, then actually, it may become a challenge for ASEAN. So how ASEAN respond to that, like for example, getting membership in BRICS, for example, as an organization, could be something they can look at. But the challenge is not there yet, but it can become a challenge. So BRICS is something that ASEAN will have to watch carefully.
So behind the closed doors, do ASEAN leaders debate about a unified position between U.S. and China? Or it's more of a taboo that people just don't even bring up at the meetings?
I think they, on the broad strokes, yes, how they deal with China and all that. On the broad strokes, yes. But on the negotiations, let's say on the tariffs, right? Each of the ASEAN countries went on their own because their relationship with the U.S., right? Individual countries, they are very different, right? So they cannot negotiate as a grouping because of the trade structure. So they have to go individually and negotiate with the U.S. because also certain countries are much more favored by the U.S. So they, of course, they don't want to go together as a group because then it may affect their negotiation position. I can understand that. It's a practical way of looking at it. But what is important is now, since the tariffs actually now a bit more clearer with the U.S., here's where ASEAN will really have to sit together and see what is the regional strategy in terms of managing the U.S.-ASEAN relations, right? I think U.S. is still interested in ASEAN and working with ASEAN and all that. So we need to see how we can really tap that kind of cooperation that we have with the U.S. If you look at on the geopolitical side, I think we still need the U.S. presence in the region, actually. So it's an important aspect of it, right? Especially we have the South China Sea issue. Still today, there is no code of conduct yet. We are still negotiating a code of conduct. Okay, we just have a declaration on the code of conduct, which is just I would say, a document that can provide some guidance in terms of, let's say, if there's a conflict there, what is the stages, what are the processes. But I think we will really need a legally binding code of conduct there to secure that part of Southeast Asia. So I think ASEAN will have to look at various aspects of it and how as an organization it can work with those issues, at the same time continue the bilateral relations.
It's a $1 million question. Then it's how do you actually execute it when it comes to the day when you have to make a decision choosing between U.S. and China. The great power struggle is going to stay for us for the next decades or centuries. So you cannot keep playing this naive balancing game from my perspective until it breaks. So So it's either you let each country to completely decide on their own, or you have something prepared early before bigger events happen that could split the member states among themselves.
Yeah. So in the case of the ASEAN, their policy is, I would say, like Indonesia coined it, policy of equidistance. That means we keep everyone as friends, and no one is our enemy. Okay. Because if you look at it, I mean, we need the US because US is the biggest investor in Southeast Asia. Still, the US companies are the most biggest investor. Then we need China because China is the biggest trading partner of ASEAN actually. So at the same time, on the political side, of course, there is, as you know, South China Sea, and then with the US, of course, it's the economic issue that we have. So how do we, as a region, so ASEAN is still on that balancing act, how do we balance? No one wants to take that kind of position actually. I mean, that I'm going with the US, I'm going with China, right? Yeah, but I would say like China has good influence in some of the countries because of their investment and so on. But some of the countries are keeping a distance with China. So it all depends on the individual issues actually, national issues with China and the US. Yeah, but we need both the players in the region actually. So as of now, I think it's a bit difficult to come to a position where I will go with China, I'll go with the US. But we have to go with ASEAN, I think. I mean, ASEAN will have to really manage this more closely, I think. That's why I kind of feel that the organization really need to integrate better.
Get itself together.
Together first, so that you can actually look at all these issues in a more cohesive way, actually.
Yeah.
So that's where I think the essence is going to be.
Yeah.
That's what I kind of came to after I wrote my book too on the transformative ASEAN. I recognize that is actually one of the biggest gap actually. How do you bring this organization together? Is it still a loosely formed organization or is it a tightly formed organization? Because ASEAN has always been seen as a loosely formed organization. So are we still there? Or are we moving to a more tighter organization? And if it's a tighter organization, what is it all about? So how do we work together in a more effective way? Yeah.
So as we're moving into some of the more uncomfortable questions of ASEAN, more existential questions, what do you think will happen to ASEAN in this scenario of a war happen in South China Sea, whether it's China invading Taiwan or something happen in the common international waters between China and Philippines? Would ASEAN become a more unified regional power that really becomes an event that brings countries together, or do you think it will become a flashpoint among the member states?
So I think ASEAN being an international player in a sense, ASEAN is actually, ASEAN countries are in the UN and the various organizations. I think if you look at ASEAN way of operating, it will be first the diplomatic position actually. So during the Cambodia crisis in the 1970s, even Myanmar, the UN was an important organization actually that ASEAN worked with actually. Yeah. So I think ASEAN will take a position on it. I think it will come together. If any of the ASEAN countries is attacked, I think it will come together. But it will use the diplomatic process first and try and work it out at the UN level and the ASEAN level in terms of how best to respond to the situation actually. Yeah. So I think that's what they will do actually. Because ASEAN believes in multilateralism, and working things through the diplomatic channel actually. So that will be the first response. But whether they will come together for a military stand down, military action, I don't think so actually. Yeah. So we will. That's why I think the relations with the various countries is so important. How do we work with them so that one, we avoid. I mean, the prevention part is better than the actual situations. That's why I think this code of conduct is so important for the region. So it lays out the stages and what to be done if there is a conflict. So I hope ASEAN can get this done by the next 1-2 years actually, with China's support. So yeah. So I think always I see it ASEAN as a more diplomatic institution trying to work out issues, not as a defense pact. Even if you look at ASEAN, right? I mean, the defense cooperation started the last. Yeah. They now have the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting. But even then, the defense ministers they exchange ideas on all the issues and all that in the region. But the main thing is how to use their resources for non-military aspects like, natural disasters and so on. So how do they use, say, the helicopters or, food distribution and things like that in Myanmar and all that. So that's how ASEAN look at the defense cooperation actually. So it's a good forum for them to sit and discuss international or geopolitical issues, but the action on the ASEAN side is more looking at non-military kind of cooperation on the military side. Yeah. So that's how they work actually.
Do you think there is a sufficient sense of urgency among the ASEAN leaders today? When PAP was re-elected recently, Lawrence Wong and all the senior Singaporean statesmen come out and emphasize this point that the world is changing.
Yeah.
The ground is shifting. Is it being echoed across ASEAN states when you look around the region, or is it just Singapore yelling into the abyss on its own?
No, I think all the countries, they share the similar sentiments, but the reaction to it is so different, right? Singapore's reaction of it is going to be different from, say, Indonesia actually. So Indonesia, first thing is when we go back to Trump tariff, first thing they wanted to do is actually negotiate to see how they can, work with the US. Of course, they didn't want any tariffs actually, but now they have 19%. What I understand from my contacts in Indonesia, they're trying to bring it even down actually. They don't think they will settle for 19%. So I would say they all share the same sentiment, but the response from the different countries is different actually. Like Laos, for example, I don't see much action from them actually, because I think the economy is more dependent on China, I guess. I mean, so, and Thailand and so on. So it all depends. So there's not I would say, coordinated ASEAN response to that. The only coordinated response is we should not retaliate on the tariff of the US. We will try and work it out, because US has been a good partner of ASEAN, and we try and work it out. That is the kind of agreement they have. But the response is actually all dependent on the individual economies.
Yeah. So everybody is aware that the world is changing. All the multilateral globalist norms are weakening, but it's just what can we do about it? ASEAN, when it comes to international issues, I may be wrong, but it doesn't have a unified position on Israel, Gaza. It doesn't have a unified position on Ukraine, Russia. It doesn't have a unified position on the tariffs, or even internal issues recently, like we saw in the Thailand-Cambodia border clash. Was there much ASEAN intervention behind it?
Yes, on the Thailand-Cambodia border clash, actually, the chair of ASEAN actually intervened, and he called the two heads of government to KL, and they announced a ceasefire, actually. So that's actually a good example of how the chair of ASEAN can help in diffusing tension. That's on. At the same time, I think I've mentioned in my book,
Mm.
also on the Myanmar situation,
Mm.
it has been dragging on for so long, and there is no clear path forward. I mean, ASEAN has envoy. I mean, they've set up a rotating envoy, depending on the chair. Who's the chair for the year? There'll be envoy to Myanmar to help try and resolve the issue, right? The political situation there. That did not work well, actually.
Mm.
So there are a
Yeah.
lot of suggestions actually now that you should have a permanent envoy actually instead of rotating. So ASEAN will need to really tweak some of these things to see action. But I agree that in many of the issues, there may not be a ASEAN position.
Mm.
Many of the issues, but they discuss actually.
Mm.
But they discuss, like if some of the issues they can agree, I think they will issue statements. But in some of the issues they can't agree, I think it's going to be like, ASEAN is normally silent on that.
Mm.
Yeah, so that's the situation.
But just on this ASEAN's contribution to the peace treaty, to the peace resolution between Thailand and Cambodia, was it really ASEAN's working behind the scene, or is it because Anwar's personal charisma or his personal influence? And what would happen in a scenario if, let's say, Thailand or Cambodia were the chair of ASEAN during the year? Then ASEAN would be put into a position of the conflict of interest. Right?
Yeah. So I mean, the case of Malaysia, I would say, it's not just the chair of Malaysia. Of course, as you know, before that, when Trump has said that, okay, if you two guys don't settle the problem, I'm not going to do the renegotiation of the tariffs.
Yeah.
So of course that will be for Thailand. There's something they will have to consider, right? So there are a lot of many things going on there.
Yeah.
But the fact that the chair of ASEAN was willing to step in and resolve the issue was a good thing, actually. To me, is something that really helped to push the ceasefire through, right? I mean, all these things help, but ASEAN chair stepping in really helped in the process. But you are right. I mean, it also depends on the chair itself. For example, when Cambodia was chairing ASEAN, there was 1 year ASEAN did not issue a statement. Actually, normally at ASEAN meetings, summits, statements would be issued. But when it came to about the South China Sea, Cambodia did not issue the statement. So in a sense, became a talked about point actually. So I think that is also something that has happened before. So
was it because of a weak leadership during the year?
I think it was just to avoid the tension actually of putting out some statement and causing some unhappiness on both sides, I guess. So
the ASEAN chair has a lot of sway and influence.
Yeah, because the chair of the state is the ASEAN chair statement. So they have the right to whether issue it or not. I mean, normal tradition is ASEAN issues the statement, right? Yeah. So that also happened actually. So
and does he need to consult the member states, or it's entirely up to his discretion?
It's actually they consult the member states before they issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what exactly was written there, but it was not issued. Yeah. So so it happens actually.
What year was it?
A few years back, because now it's Malaysia, so probably a few cycles back. Was Cambodia was the chair, So the intention could be right, because their aim was not to basically cause a sensitive situation. I mean, but it is not a tradition in ASEAN not to issue a statement after a leaders meeting or ministerial meeting actually. So
it was a reflection of internal fractions and debates, conflicts, more likely.
Yeah, sometimes, there was,
more likely than strategic silence on the issue.
Yeah. So
they couldn't come to agree on what
Yeah,
to put in the
probably that, I
statement.
guess. But that happened before. What I wanted to say is that happened. So who chairs ASEAN is also important, right? Yeah. So the next chair will be, after Malaysia, will be the Philippines. I'm not sure whether Myanmar and then Philippines, but the situation, so maybe it will be the Philippines. So, yeah. So you can hear more about the South China Sea, I guess, from there, because that's one of the main things that Philippines is kind of interested in. Yeah.
But let's say if Thailand was the chair this year, then what would happen? Does ASEAN have the capacity to intervene and
they will have
peace talks?
Yes, I think the foreign ministers would probably have huddled together and would have advised both sides to, announce ceasefire, I think. So, the good thing about ASEAN is all these huddles really help. But ASEAN is not like an organization is out there to promote, what it's doing actually. They will not be writing, doing something to just, some of these things, they keep it silent. They do it internally and then let it work. But doesn't come out. So they don't communicate those things out, like in the media and all that. So it's not captured by anyone. Yeah, but that helps actually sometimes to do it in silence, informally, and then getting a decision. Yeah.
So even if the chair is not in a position to contribute, there are other mechanisms and instruments to solve.
So they will actually
conflicts.
Basically sit together, discuss with the chair actually.
Yeah.
And then how to solve this issue or making some strategies on how to move forward. Yeah, I think they have enough experience to handle internal conflicts and all that, right? And each of them know.
But the chair would be biased on certain issues when it has a stake, right?
Oh yes. So, yeah. But the chair cannot issue a statement on. It must be their own statement actually. Maybe if they are from one country, then they issue a statement from their country. But it cannot be an ASEAN statement when there's no consensus. So this consensus principle is important. Even though this is a chair statement, it must be agreed by all before you as a chair of ASEAN release it. So in that way, the consensus principle helps to make sure that whatever comes out of ASEAN is something that all the 10 countries agree. Yeah.
Do you think this rotation of chairmanship is the most effective? Because I don't think that happens for the EU, for example, because they have a permanent setup. But I think BRIC follows that, right? Every year, it's a rotating chairmanship.
So it was started since ASEAN was established. So I think they still continue that, But there's so many things happening in a year, For one country to just chair 1 year, and then leave, it's a marathon. So it's not. Maybe there's not enough time actually, But there are 10 countries, right? So if you say, you give them 2 years or 3 years, then a country will have to wait so long to be a chair. So that's also the disadvantage. So they still keep the 1 year because then every country will have a chance to chair.
Do you think that poses a risk on continuity in decision making?
That actually poses an issue on the agenda because different country, right? The agenda will be different. Okay, I want to focus on, like for example, Philippines coming in. They want to focus on the code of conduct probably, And Philippines is very much focused on the social cultural community of ASEAN. They want to focus on that. So what happens to say Malaysia's focus on the other aspect of it? So here is where I think the other organizations, like the ASEAN Secretariat or the various ASEAN bodies, the councils, the ministerial meeting, will need to provide that institutional memory to push things actually forward. So, that happens. But I think there's a balance off with the Secretariat and the ASEAN organs actually that are working on many of these areas.
Just maybe on the military alliance, on the defense minister meetings, like you said, its focus has been more on the disaster relief and other fronts. When it comes to, let's say, an actual war breaking out in Asia, would ASEAN countries come together and form an alliance like the NATO in the regional level? And
No.
how are the military capabilities of each member state, or is it still a lot of them
Yeah.
depends on the US
Yeah,
support?
I think it's quite clear actually, because when ASEAN was established, right, military was the least part of the cooperation aspect they wanted to focus on. It's only the last few years that last 10 years or so that this ADMM or the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting really come up. So I don't think they will go in that direction. Probably they will just use the UN and other officers actually to bring about some kind of unified position within ASEAN as well as globally, I guess. Right? It's already been seen during the Cambodian crisis. This was what ASEAN did actually in the UN. Even for Myanmar, I think ASEAN issued the statement. I was there actually. We issued a statement on Myanmar when the first time when the monks were protesting, and there was one Japanese news reporter was shot. ASEAN issued a statement from UN from when they were meeting at the UN General Assembly. So in a sense, that's how the region will handle the issue, not going into any kind of military alliance, which I don't think anyone is thinking of also.
Did ASEAN have a playbook during the Cold War? Because I think that was the most recent historic period where you had to balance between the two great powers on the verge of conflict. And can it do something similar today between U.S. and China?
I think with their 50 years experience, I think they have enough knowledge on how to handle the superpowers actually. So say US and China, So, but it's all going to be based on the diplomatic positioning rather than anything else. I don't think they will be like going as an ally or doing something like that. But it was going to be using the diplomatic channels.
Non-confrontational
aspect of it, because both are important for the region, so they don't want to be an enemy of any one of them, right? So that's how they will handle it, I guess. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. As we're probably coming to the last bits of the podcast, I'll ask you one last question on the ASEAN front.
Sure.
Given your vast number of years of experience sitting in the meetings, do you have a most memorable meeting you've witnessed, whether it's at the ASEAN or other forums? Perhaps some example cases of decision making that were unusual, or a very tense or chaotic discussion. Anything came to mind?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the UN meeting where, when the saffron revolution broke up, right? So ASEAN realized that, hey, I cannot be just sitting there and not doing anything. So I remember, the foreign ministers huddled together, and so I was from the ASEAN Secretariat, so they wanted someone to take notes, actually, And it was so sudden, right? When I went in, so I just had to write in my notebook, and then one of the ministers actually wrote in a piece of tissue paper, the tissue Soviet, that these are the main points actually. So then I had to craft it out and get it ready for the ministers to approve. So it was all done within 1-2 hours actually. Because ASEAN realized the importance of having a position on Myanmar then. Even though Myanmar was a member of ASEAN, they needed a position because so that's a good thing about ASEAN actually. They are very concerned about their credibility, the image outside. So if one member is going to damage their image, then they will have to take some kind of action. So that's when I saw them reacting to that situation. So I've been in also trade negotiations, political and security and all that. So there's always tension actually. So when
So-
we have the East Asia Summit discussion, right? So there was an issue about whether we should bring Russia and Australia into the East Asia Summit.
Mm.
Yeah, so a lot of discussion, and I remember I was asked to write a paper actually on Russia and why we should bring Russia into the East Asia Summit,
Mm.
and that became a discussion point, and eventually we admitted Russia
Mm.
because Russia is also an important part of this of Asia actually, I would say, right? Australia is also a very crucial player in Southeast Asia, so
Mm.
we saw a need to bring both together. So this kind of tension, there was a lot of tension. Oh, we don't need to bring certain member in. Others will say, no, we need to bring. Then there will be negotiation like, if you want to bring this country, then I want this country. So how do you manage that? So I was kind of involved in those kind of management actually. And
Mm.
so, and the reason out things. The reason out, and then eventually, the secretariat role will be to provide that kind of information details actually, and then for them to make the decision.
Mm.
So I've seen that aspect also.
Do smaller states have an equal say?
Equal say.
Equal say.
That's a good thing about if you compare organization like SAARC, where India plays a very dominant role, South Asia Regional Cooperation, and ASEAN, Indonesia is a very balanced member in the sense that it allows, Indonesia being the half the size of Southeast Asia can always say that no, I want you to do this way, but Indonesia is not like that.
Mm.
It basically allows all voices to come, so even a country like Singapore can voice out
Mm.
equally,
Mm.
and so ASEAN countries are all treated equal.
Mm.
So whether you're a big country or a small country, a big economy or small economy, you're fine.
Mm.
You have equal say.
Mm.
But the decision is not by voting, but consensus.
Mm.
Yeah, sometimes you cannot get consensus immediately.
Mm.
So what happened is they go into consultation. No, we cannot get consultation.
Mm.
This consultation can be as 10 countries or one or two countries speaking to a country that doesn't agree,
Mm.
trying to find a way.
Mm.
So whatever decision is made in ASEAN is by consensus.
Mm.
So that's the important aspect, I guess.
Mm. Okay. Before we close, perhaps could you share a little bit about what you do at Public Policy Asia, and how can people reach out to you if they want to?
Right. So Public Policy Asia Advisors was set up in 2019. It's a business advisory helping multinational companies, startups, small and medium enterprises to assess the markets in Asia. So they may have policy issues, political issues, they may have regulatory issues, market access issues. We help them with those issues. We have consultants across Asia Pacific. So our consultants can help you get into those markets. Working with the government or the stakeholders and so on. So that's the consultancy aspect. We also have a publishing house because we are also a thought leader. And so PPA publishing is there. So I'm looking at for young budding writers on the fiction and non-fiction side of it. If you have a manuscript that you want to share with me for publishing, you can always find me on LinkedIn and send to us, and then we can look at whether it's of commercial interest. So we have different schemes. You can look at our website. We have the traditional scheme, and then we have the hybrid and other schemes where you can publish with our label. Then we also are starting an academy soon, the next few months, which will roll out executive training on like ASEAN, on the free trade agreements in Southeast Asia or Asia. We will also have other training like food and nutrition, looking at public policy, public advocacy, crisis management, and so on. This will be tailored to companies and associations, organization needs. So you can always work with us. We can provide our standard training, or we can customize training for you. So it's an integrated business. So consultancy, publishing house, and academy. Find me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. I'm there.
For all the aspiring writers, please reach out to Dr. Nathan And as we conclude today's podcast, I want to thank you for coming on the show and for interesting, very enlightening discussion, and which I've learned a lot. So thank you again, and I hope to bring you back on in the future.
Thank you so much for the invitation.